right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome to the Public Safety and Government Operations Committee meeting. In attendance today, I know it sounds like someone is listening to the hearing. If you could mute whatever device you're using, just so we don't have that echo, it'd be helpful. In attendance today, we have, of course, myself, Chair of the Committee, representing the 4th District, Councilman Cohen, representing the 1st District,
Mr. Chair.
Councilwoman Porter, representing the 10th District, and Councilwoman Ramos, representing the 14th District. Also attending today, I have Councilman Stokes, representing the 12th District. Representing the, all right, jump right into it. So this afternoon, we're gonna be holding a joint hearing, both on legislative oversight 22-0030 and for resolution 22-0138R for the LO. It's legislative oversight, crime reduction, and violence prevention for the purpose of the committee holding regular hearings with the police department, Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety Engagement, and other agencies to monitor the progress of the city's crime reduction and violence prevention efforts. And that bill is put forward by myself. And for resolution 22-0138R, it's an informational hearing on the coordination between police commissioner, school police chief, and sheriff for the purpose of inviting the Baltimore Police Commissioner, chief of Baltimore City Schools Police, Baltimore Sheriff, State's Attorney for Baltimore City, and the Deputy Mayor of Public Safety to explain to the council how the agencies and their officials coordinate planning and activities to enhance public safety for the citizens of Baltimore. And that resolution was introduced on September 19th, 2022 by Councilman Stokes. And so I just want to note we are hosting those jointly. I believe those conversations are related. And so we have a robust attendance today from guests to discuss Councilman Stokes' resolution on the coordination between agencies. And you know, I also want to acknowledge we have schools chief, as I mentioned, sheriff, state's attorney, deputy mayor for public safety. We have DJS here as well, I believe. Do we have a representative from DJS? Thank you. DJS has graciously come out to provide whatever assistance they can to the conversation. And I understand we have a slightly reduced attendance from the Baltimore Police Department today because of a funeral. So I just want to, thank Aaron and Sharon, Shannon and Colonel Jones for coming out and representing the department, and especially DJS for coming out to the council meeting. I'll have an opportunity to allow Councilman Stokes to make any opening remarks that he'd like to make, but I'm really curious to hear, especially considering recent events, how our public safety agencies and law enforcement stakeholders are responding to the alarming trend of shootings, both fatal and non-fatal, of our young people. I'm happy to see that it appears that crime is generally going down. We're seeing less violence this year, but unfortunately, high levels of violence are affecting our young people, and it remains a very significant concern for myself, my colleagues, the citizens of the city. And with so many high-profile incidents happening across the city, I think it's incumbent that we think really hard and fast about what we can do to address the coordination and approach going forward across the city. So Sunday's shooting in the heart of downtown, just like the latest, is just an indication of the latest trend of young people falling victim to gun violence in our city. It's also happened in my district. Unfortunately, had to be at the scene of a gruesome shooting, and it's happened in far too many districts across the city, of which my colleagues here can probably share, unfortunately, the same experience. So I'm really looking forward to having the conversation. I know that you guys all work together, and I really, I believe this is a big part of how we sustainably resolve this issue. But with that, I'm looking forward to the conversation and looking forward to hearing from Councilman Stokes on his approach to the issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to be clear that my hearing is about the collaboration between all the law enforcement here. I talk to people in the community. I'm a council person, but I live in the city. I want to be safe like everybody else. And the reason for the hearing, for the community and the council to know what all our law enforcement are doing to address crime in the city, And I can use some examples. Previous sheriff, when we had some issues in my district, the sheriff people, his staff came out. When they had some issues in my district, school police, you know, they supported our police here in the east and maybe southeast. So the relationship was already there, but I think the community want to see exactly what all of them are doing, but they all talking and working together. So my hearing is just have a robust conversation about what all law enforcement to do to address crime in the city. Because you know when school closed, then I hope that some of the school police are available to help out in some of these areas with violence, because most violence are in Eastern and Western, I understand. And we want to make sure our seniors, our young people are safe. I want to be safe when I leave out my door. So if I'm not that I'm not feeling safe, but I want everybody to feel like our law enforcement are doing the best they can and working together to make sure we make sure people in this city, throughout the city, are feeling safe. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman, and I appreciate you bringing forward the resolution. I understand our State Attorney Bates, he's got to run a little bit early, so I want to be very cognizant of the time. I've asked the police department to give us a pretty straightforward and brief synopsis of where we are with crime across the city, and hopefully that grounds the conversation. With that, I do want to hand off to the police department before handing off to you, Mr. State's Attorney, but we'll start with the police department.
Good afternoon, Colonel Jones, BPD. So where we are with our city crime, I would like to say first start off with, you know, the commissioner put out his 4-year plan of where the agency is, and I would just like to highlight that in that last 4 years, we've seen citywide crime reduction, enforcement, and proactivity measures increase, strengthening local, state, federal partnerships, stronger accountability within our Public Integrity Bureau, as well as we're being a national model for best practices where agencies are looking to BPD in reference to how we're being successful, and not only in reference to our crime reduction, our use of GVR, our use of co-production policing with our other entities and stakeholders, but it's how we're dealing and being transparent and engaging with our community. As the commissioner has said, there has been a 16% reduction in overall violent crime since 2018, as well as a 26% citywide reduction in property crimes. We've seen also at the same time a 280% increase in total proactivity engagement in reference to officers being involved. We're trying to get it to the point where there is a 60-40 split between 60% of the time the officers are responding to calls for service, but there is a 40% likelihood and a response that officers are being engaged with the community and doing things that are proactive. Proactivity going from foot patrol, business checks, to as well as just engaging the community and kids with playing basketball or anything like that. We want to see that proactivity to get that softer side of Sears, where everything does not have to be police being used in a stick and an engagement thing, that they're also being a well partner and showing that, look, we get it, we're a part of this community as well. So we have seen those things, the increase in reference to our group violence strategy, modernizing our buildings as well as our department with the increase in newer vehicles, which increases our response time for having officers being able to respond to a timely manner to calls for service, as well as connecting operational and data-driven tools in reference to how we deploy strategies along the city. Reimagining policing is a big thing in Baltimore City, and serving as that national model, as I had said. So starting with our overview of our crime in reference to our clearance rates, as you said, sir, we have seen an increase in our clearance rates. Right now, Baltimore City for the homicide is showing 49% percentage rate for our clearances for homicides, the national average being 55%, so we're still striving to get that national average for homicides. As it relates to non-fatal shootings, currently we are showing a 28.8%.
Colonel, if you can hold on 1 second, I think we're going to try and see if we can get your slides up. I know we were having some technical difficulties, and if not, it's okay, but
Sure.
I do think I know that the committee members have your slides.
Yes, sir.
For folks.
Yeah, we will revise. That's why we provided the hard copies. Yes, sir.
We'll just proceed. Unfortunately, we don't have it at the moment. We're working to get it up there. But for council members, you have their slides right in front of you. And right now, we're looking at the third slide, talking about clearance rates.
So just continuing with non-fatal shootings, we're currently at a 28.8%, which is 2% above the national average for non-fatal shooting clearances. Robberies, we're at 18%, which is 2% below the national average. Burglaries, we are at 11%, which is 2% above the national average. And rapes, we are at 21%, and the national average is 32%. Going to your next page of the slides. Bear with me as I turn this page. What we have shown, we have seen significant increases in our arrests. Right now, I know a big thing that the communities are talking about is the open air drug markets. Right now, we are at 419 arrests for the year. This is including felony and misdemeanor arrests. We're at 381 handgun violations for the year, 107 arrests in reference to robberies. For attempted murder, we're at 45, and for murder, we're at 28 incidents. As it relates to gun-related crimes, what we are showing is while there is a slight 3% decrease in reference to overall handgun violations for the year at 387, this is an increase in reference to what our patrol division is giving. So we're seeing that the boots on the streets, the officers that are on the streets, either them, our district action teams, as well as our mobile metro teams, are making the arrests on the ground. So this is, although an alarming thing, we like to see that our officers on the ground, because we hear about officers being in the car and not being engaged and not making the arrest, but this clearly shows that there is an increase, and of that 387%, 359 of those arrests are coming from our patrol division. In reference to the next slide, will be our citywide overview of our crime. Currently, what we're looking at in reference to 2023, there has been a decrease in our homicides. In 2022, there were 81 at this time. There are 67 currently. We are minus 17% in reference to our homicides. 102 versus 141 for 2022. We are minus 27 in reference to our non-fatal shootings. We are minus 7 in reference to our rapes, 59 versus 4. Robbery carjackings, we are minus 33%, 96 versus 144. I will say in reference to the carjackings, this is something that is alarming to all of us. We realize that it has been a trend not only in Baltimore City, but nationally as well as our surrounding jurisdictions. We have attributed this, of course, a lot to the issues with the Hyundai vehicles and vehicles in general that now have to use a keyless entry system. So no longer can you just take a key and pop the lock. You actually have to have the key fob because they're keyless entry systems. So individuals are now being forced to actually take the vehicle through carjacking to then do their illegal means. So when we come to carjackings, we have been robustly working with, as Councilwoman Ramos has realized in her areas, with the districts to provide not only intelligence, but also deployment in reference to where these hotspots are occurring, working with our citywide robbery as well as our federal partners in reference to how can we address this issue on a federal level when they cross jurisdictions, so looking into Hobbs Acts and other things that address that, as well as we currently have 150 anti-theft devices that we're giving out within each district to individuals who have those Hyundai vehicles that we've shown through YouTube videos that can easily have their steering mechanism compromised. So we're giving out 150 of those with more that are expected to come. I'll jump down briefly to like our burglaries. Right now, we're minus 22% in our burglaries. We are 682 versus 875 of last year. You will see the large increase in reference to our auto thefts. That's going to be attributed to, as I said, because individuals are having to either steal cars, break into cars, and they're using these cars on the latter end in reference to some of the robberies that we're seeing. So we're attributing some of these vehicles in reference to robberies and carjackings from previously being stolen. What we have done is we've created a carjacking and stolen auto protocol, where as soon as an incident comes out, the dispatchers are made aware of these incidents of these vehicles in their description, and is given out citywide. So then other officers that are monitoring our LPR systems quickly as possible identifying these vehicles that are where they have may be stolen in one part of the city or doing nefarious acts in the other part of the city. So that's what we're seeing with that. My next slide. So when we come to our district homicide comparison, we have, since 2017, we have shown, violence has shown consistently over the years. What we have noticed right now, we're seeing an increase in our Northeast District and our Western District. The Western District, what we have seen is issues that are normally outside of the areas that they have been focusing on with their GVRS. There have been some incidents that have been not related to walk-in shootings, but also reference to individuals that are acquaintances of each other, who are bad actors in possession of firearms, who have poor conflict resolution skills that are dealing with that. In our Northeastern District, we have a little bit of the same. The Northeast, unfortunately, has been plagued with several hospitals. So individuals that may have been shot in the county and other places are showing up in our Northeastern District, not being as cooperative as we would like them to. So then it is hard then trying to backtrack and investigate exactly where the shooting has occurred. I will say that also we have understood that the Northeast District has a little bit of connectivity with our Eastern District up the hill, down the hill. So we have actively looking at both of those organizations in reference to individuals along that Miami Street corridor that are residing and having other instances to be in the Northeast District, where that's where the violence is being attributed to and shown. Next slide, in reference to the district shooting comparison, what we have seen is the numbers are showing the same in reference to over the years. We have seen, of course, we're doing it with year-to-date crime. We're seeing reductions in a lot of our districts. What we're looking forward to is, and I know that Director Jackson will go into it, is the collaboration with GVRS in the Western District. We're looking at modeling those things in the Southwest District, as well as the Central District coming on board. So we're looking at having that robust effect within a GVRS along those other districts. What I will say is we're not standing by waiting for other districts to stand up. What we're telling the other district commanders to do is to be a part of the two districts that are having it right now, to understand what the group model looks like, how to identify individuals, and how to also be a part of it right now until it gets stabilized and instituted into those districts. I will say, the issue that we've seen year to date, what we are monitoring, and I know we have monitored it in other council hearings, is incidents incurring multiple victims within those districts. So what we have seen so far year to date is, we have had 21 total incidents of two individuals or more being involved in a non-fatal shooting. Of those 21 incidents, 52 victims. 12 of those cases have been closed, 8 cases have been opened. Right now, the Southeast District is leading with 4 of those incidents. So we're monitoring that. That's how I was able to, provide you that information, that it is something that we're actively looking into, that we have incidents of 2 or more victims.
And I just want to be sensitive to time.
Yes, sir. Yep. And lastly for me, I know one of the biggest parts that we were concerned about is youth violence. We have shown so far this year to date, there have been 9 incidents in reference to juvenile victims of violence for homicides, 28 incidents in reference to individuals that were shot non-fatally. We are working robustly with our partners, Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Services, Mayor's Office of African American Male Engagement, YAP, ROCA, our faith-based leaders, as well as our community, as well as working with school police and our other allied law enforcement agencies to address this youth violence. I will say what we have done robustly for the last several weeks as it relates to juveniles downtown is we've created a robust plan where we have utilized our summer policing plan and staffing. What happens is individuals that are not normally assigned to patrol, they're in our administrative bureaus or in the other units, they are being utilized in our downtown deployment. This provides us with 15 to 20 individuals in strategic areas within the downtown area, Pratt Street, Lombard, Commerce, the World Trade Center, working with MDTA police around the World Trade Center, working with MTA in reference to not only the bus hubs that are downtown, but also those transitory hubs that lead to downtown. So our partners are advising us when larger than normal numbers of juveniles are coming downtown for us to deploy forward. I will say, unfortunately, for the incident on the 9th that occurred where the 2 juveniles were the victims of non-fatal shootings, our officers were across the street making an arrest for an assault while they had to create a skirmish line to protect not only the victim of the assault, the suspect, but also our officers. Unfortunately, that act of violence took place across the street. Recovered from that incident was a gun in a bag. We're doing an investigation in reference to not only that, but also an individual was arrested with the polymer 80 in his possession that day, as well as an individual who was illegally riding a dirt bike and in possession of a potential controlled dangerous substance was also arrested. I will say just year to date, for just numbers, we have arrested 12 juveniles in reference to polymer 80s this year. So we are actively, engaged in proactive enforcement in reference to individuals who are not only illegally possessing these firearms, but juveniles that are possessing these firearms. I believe we have a robust approach to this. I know we had a meeting Monday with the CAO and the deputy mayor in reference to other city partners in reference to our response to the previous weekend. I know we have a meeting this Friday in reference to where we are going forward in reference to our deployment downtown, not only with us, but with our sister agencies from the sheriff, sister allied agencies from the sheriff's, MTA, MDTA police, and school police.
Thank you, Colonel. I will turn it over to the State's Attorney's Office. Oh, and first I want to acknowledge Councilman Burnett has joined us virtually, and also our sheriff has joined us.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Conaway, Councilman Stokes.
If you could use the mic.
Oh, sorry.
Yep, just so we can
Thank
all
you,
hear
Chairman Conaway, Councilman Stokes for having this hearing, and to the other members of the council. I want to thank you very much for being here and inviting us. Just want to touch bases. Actually, tomorrow makes 100 days in office for me and my administration, and a number of things have happened. We've hired 50 staff members in the first 100 days, a number of which are attorneys, and a number of which support staff. So we began to really understand some of the things we really need to do, what we need to do to build out. One of the things we had to do, we first have to hire and we have to train. Part of the training process, we've now implemented a bi-weekly training with our district court prosecutors. They're focusing not only on what we want to eventually move into citations and quality of life crime prosecution, and actually we don't even call it prosecution, we call it accountability. But we want to have them trained on that, but also trained on what they need to do to how to read reports, how to understand how ballistic reports happen. And so we've worked with police department, BPD, to have these young prosecutors go down there, understand what's happening, to understand how they do drug analysis, what that really looks like, have that entire process, also working with the police department to talk to them about what's going on in the courtroom as well. So we also had that opportunity to go to their training headquarters over the University of Baltimore and understand their training process. That's helped us understand a number of things greatly. And the reason that's important is because one of the things that we plan, and I've spoken to the police commissioner, we'd like to move towards what will be the citation docket, citation court, to deal with quality of life crimes. We're not there yet. We've sitting down, we've talked to Monzi, we've talked to a number of providers, we've talked to the courts, we've talked to the public defender's office, the judges, the police department. We're getting everything in place to be able to do that. And our goal is to work with the police department and even the sheriff's department to have individuals receive citations. And these citations will eventually lead to community service for a number of these low-level offenses, quality life offenses. And also right there with the community service gives an opportunity to give the resources that so many service providers do provide. This way we're not trying to lock up individuals, but we're just saying we're going to hold you accountable so that in this way you have the resources at the very, very beginning. So that's the big thing that we've really been working on. We're working with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the ATF to talk about a handgun guideline policy. So what does that look like? This way we can steer more individuals who should be on the federal side. We can steer them for federal prosecution, repeat violent offenders who have handgun possessions. but that also means that we have to have what's called SAUSA, state's attorneys that are in the U.S. Attorney's Office. So we're going to have to do some more hiring of those individuals, but they are highly specialized. And so that's also one of the things. But just having the guidelines, this now says, you know, just not every handgun case is going to run to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and not every handgun case that we have will be on the state side. That those individuals that we find are repeat violent offenders, repeat offenders of handgun violations and laws, those are the individuals, because they will serve significant amount of time period on the federal side, which is almost 80% of their time period. So we're putting together those guidelines. It's something that they used to have, but that we didn't have before. Also worked on the successful passage of legislation, 90-day legislative session, House Bill 824, that what it did, it made the penalty for wear, carry, and transport illegal handguns across the board 5 years. And we felt that was an important tool in our toolbox to focus on the legal handgun possession. One of the things we've understood is that the message is getting through loud and clear. We're having more individuals say that, you know, they recognize that this is a serious situation. And so that was important for us to make sure we were able to do that. The other thing we've began to do, we've had some initial dialogue with the Sheriff's Department and Sheriff's Office, how we can work together, and also continue to work together with the GVRS program. I know my office has been very instrumental in understanding. We've begun to talk about what are some potential key performance indicators from the state's attorney's side that we can make sure we do to support the program, and specifically putting the number of prosecutors in our office, central booking within our office, that when these individuals come into the system who are GVRS identified, that we have the prosecutors who already know these individuals, the prosecutors who are prepared for these cases, and how we deal with them through the entire system. And that's also continue having my once a month lunch meeting with the police commissioner. We didn't have it this week because of a number of factors, but we have a really great dialogue. Talked about how we do a number of different things, what are our plans in terms of how we, and specifically the citation docket. And I think when we have everything together, we'll be very ready to just have the rollout, but it also entails making sure the police department is ready. But first it had to be on us, meaning the state's attorney's office, to ensure that we had the number of prosecutors and they were properly trained. Now we're in that process, and our goal hopefully is by late spring to have this together with the understanding and knowing that in the summertime, late spring, that a number of issues that you have in your district, that we'll be prepared to deal with those issues and understanding that. The other thing we also have to be very cognizant of come July 1st, the issue of the smell of marijuana. There was a tool that was used by a number of police officers that in terms of going out and finding the individuals who had possessed these illegal handguns. So we're also now having that dialogue and discussion to figure out, okay, how do we evolve and understand the laws change to make sure that we're constitutionally correct policing on the police department side, but also making sure that we're following the law from the state's attorney's side. So those are conversations that we're continuing to have and understanding what we need to do to be prepared. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. State's Attorney. I'll hand it over to Councilman Stokes.
Thank you, State's Attorney. I'm glad you said that, because that's the idea of me having a hearing, talk about that collaboration, not just with the police commissioner, the sheriff's office, the deputy mayor Barstow. And you did mention that you do have those conversations with the commissioner's office. And the reason why I'm asking, because are we still having those commissioners with all 5-hour law enforcement when we talk about crime in the city? I hear it a lot from my constituents say they don't kind of see that. So the idea of the hearing is for y'all to present and tell us how y'all working together in terms of addressing crime, because it has gotten hot. And we see what happens when they get hot in the city, because sometimes young people don't have nothing to do. And our crime goes up, but they don't have nothing to do is because they shouldn't have to go to the harbor to feel like they got to have a place to go. We have to put money in our rec centers and have programming there, not the programming we want them to have, but the programming that's going to bring them to the rec center. And the reason why I wanted to mention that is because, and I'm not trying to get away from it, it's budget hearing. And I want to see every rec center has some money for program for these young people, but find out what they want. We always tell them what we want to give them. Everybody don't play sports. Everybody don't play football. We got to do better in this city. So the idea was to have my hearing to talk about how all the law enforcement here are working together to address some of the crime. I know you did talk about the police commissioner, we want to know, and I want to know, community want to know, are you work with the sheriff office? Are you working with the Barksdale? Are you working with the school police? If not, I mean, that's fine, but I like to hear that. And even if it's a quarterly meeting y'all do, but if y'all not talking to each other, because I said during the summer, school closed, school police are available, the sheriff's office is available when we talk about crime. So have y'all sat down in the same room, everybody, not just the police commission? I asked this question to everybody from law enforcement. Have y'all now put together a meeting where y'all meet quarterly to talk about crime in the city? If not, I think the community, myself, would like to see that happen.
No, we haven't put together something to say we're meeting every quarter, but one of the things I definitely made sure we began to do is we reached out to try to have these conversations to understand. It's almost like, I call it almost like dating. We're sitting there, we're meeting each other, now the relationship is evolving. And so that's where we are. We've had the opportunity to have these conversations with the Sheriff's Department, had the opportunity to have my office in constant communication with Monzi. With citations, this is super important because this is something where we're able to all try to work together. I feel very good about what the conversation we've had. I feel very good about working together with everybody. You know, we do have the federal partners meetings that we do once a month, and that lets us look on a larger scale. But school police, no, we haven't. But you know, with the mayor's office, Deputy Barksdale, yes, had the opportunity to have a number of those conversations. But I would say, if I had to look in the mirror, the one thing that I would think that we would need to do better, need to have a better relationship with the school police, especially on the juvenile side. The one thing that I wanted to do, we did make a recent hire. A young man started the other day who's going to really focus on that juvenile aspect for us. So he will be doing that. But one of the things from us, on our standpoint, we realized I wanted to have somebody in that position, in that role, who understood what the young people needed, had been in the school system, had the education, the background to make sure they would be in that position. So we will be doing a better job of that. We're finally getting the people to do that.
Mr. Chair, real quick, can this be a request? I would like for be more communication with all the law enforcement that's here right now. I think that'll really work out here in the city. Again, when you have a school, the schools are closed and the school police are available, the sheriffs be available, deputy sheriff. If we're not having that conversation, how do we address crime in the city if I don't know what your plan is? I don't know what your plan and y'all don't share your plan. So that's a commitment I would ask for the law enforcement here, that you'll make a commitment to more communicate together and talk about how you address crime, and even our young people in the city.
Yeah, without a doubt, I think that's a very reasonable request, so I don't have a problem. I don't think any of us would have a problem with that.
Sheriff Cogan, can you make that commitment too? It's on already, Sheriff.
Yes.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Barksdale?
Yes, sir, we can make that commitment.
School police?
No problem. Yes, sir. We'll take care of that.
So if I can, just for
One
BPD's
thing.
part of it.
Commissioner's office. Commissioner's office, yes.
Yes, sir. So what we have done, you know, I know the police commissioner is constantly having meetings with the state's attorney. I believe our executive team from BPD as well as the state's attorney's office meets regularly as well. And in that, any issues that are brought up and obstacles going forward that we have not only within BPD, but with our allied agencies, and our correspondence with those allied agencies are also given across the aisle. So I would say myself and probably to his dismay, Major Coleman talk multiple times every week on reference to incidents that are going on, as well as I know the commissioner has met with the sheriff in the end of December, as well as our chief intel officer, IT director, has met with the sheriffs as well. I know monthly, I believe it is, that the school police, MTA, and us also are on a task force meeting. So we are meeting regularly amongst ourselves, and we're open to this enhanced collaboration.
So, Deputy Commissioner, are the rest of the law enforcement in there when you meeting with MTA also? Because you only named 2 people. All I'm asking for a commitment from everybody. You say you meet with the school police. Do you meet with the sheriff? Or you meet with the state's attorney? That's the commitment I want.
No, we are. We're meeting with the state's attorney's office monthly in reference to the executive
But
level.
are you meeting with the sheriff office? Are you meeting with
Yes.
school police?
So we have
But
met.
my
I know the
commitment
PC
is-
directly has met with the sheriff. I know in reference to special events and other incidents that do come up, we may not reach out to the sheriff directly, but we reached out to his majors in reference to deployment and assistance as well. as the school police weekly, as well as MTA. As it comes up, we're involved in all three aspects of this to include the sheriff's office in reference to a collaboration. Yes, sir.
Thank you, but I'm saying, are you gonna meet with everybody? You only
Yes, sir.
you only
Yes,
mentioned
sir.
a few
We
people.
will.
All I want is that commitment.
will.
That's all.
Councilman,
Thank you.
I will say,
Find the question.
I will say one thing, if I may. We do meet bi-monthly, and the mayor has put together the bi-monthly as the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. So I do know that we are meeting bi-monthly. We have a number of those. I know Monzi's been really, really instrumental in making sure that has moved on. So that is definitely something we are meeting bi-monthly. But I understand what you're saying. You're
But
saying
sometimes
we
the
do a little
community
bit
don't
better.
know that. So, you know, I just want to make sure we make that commitment publicly while we're having this hearing. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Any other questions of the state's attorney? I know time is of the essence for him from the committee. I have one myself. You mentioned, state's attorney, that you were considering a citation court docket.
Yes.
I think it's an excellent idea. I think we really need to be thoughtful about some of those quality of life kind of crimes and what they sort of signal to folks that are perpetrating or victims sometimes of those crimes. I'm really curious for the actual execution of something like that, what that then means for our police department and their ability to enforce. Are there any barriers that we might expect? And how do we overcome those barriers? And then also, I think for your office, as you staff up to meet that need, what would that mean for you in seeing that through?
Okay. One of the things we talked about initially from January 3rd when I was sworn in, I talked about the police now having the tools in the toolbox. So you're right, what does that mean? The first thing, we didn't have enough prosecutors to actually handle that. And so we had to hire, and now we've been doing that. We now have the other every Friday training program. And now we also now have to have the buy-in from everybody. We went to the police department. One of the reasons we went to the police department to understand their training is because if I'm not mistaken, I don't want to speak for the police department, for the past 3 years, they've almost been getting trained on citations, how to deal with citations, the rules of the citations. I know the consent decree does talk about that. And not everybody necessarily will receive a citation. I think they're trained that if an individual could not get to court, then that's not an individual who receives a citation. I know we've also spoken to the mayor's office. I know, I think Ms. Jackson could probably talk more about this. I think the mayor's office, if I'm not mistaken, is even having some sort of program to try to have more individuals have identification cards and things like that, if I'm not mistaken. So I think in looking at all of that, this is a type of program that we're looking to engage individuals. We're not looking to try to lock up individuals, but it's sort of saying, okay, these are the wraparound services. I think one of the things to me when I look at the program, I think Monzi's done a really good job in dealing with the squeegee workers and focusing them on those types of services. And a lot of these individuals, whether it's loitering, so instead of an arrest, now you have a citation, do 5 hours community service, you are receiving the null pros, but more importantly, that you now are directed to the services that you may or may not need. In terms of drug possession, now you're given, and we direct you to drug treatment programs. So we've spoken to the drug treatment providers. In terms of dirt bikes, we've spoken to B360 to direct these individuals on these dirt bikes. And so what we're doing now is we're working out, and we're having those conversations. We're having those conversations with the court, finding out where it will be in every single courthouse, what day, how do we do this, how do we give this, how they get into the system to make sure that they have the court date, making sure that everybody's there. So we're doing the logistics right now. We have the idea. My deputy is Greg Solomon. She's been handling this a great deal. And so from our standpoint, we've had those conversations with everybody. Now, I probably say we're probably a month to 2 months away to really be able to really talk about what everything looks like, to finalize everything. But I had a number of conversations with the police commissioner, but I do feel very strongly that we will be able to do this by the end of late spring.
I'll invite BPD to answer the second part of that question regarding staffing. To your point, Mr. State's Attorney, training and how you guys have begun to think about this, if we've begun to have that conversation.
Yep, so we have. So in reference to staffing, not only for BPD, as the state's attorney alluded to, making him and his team accessible to how we are operating. There's been issues with such as the no-knock warrants, where the state's attorney and his team has actually come to our training facility to see how our SWAT team actually operates and how the progression of the 3-4 tiered approach to how we would make an entry. That it's just not a flashbang and running in the house, that we're giving every opportunity for individuals to come out the house, and how we're identifying warrants. So we're working.
If I could clarify,
Yep.
I'm speaking with regards to the approach of using citations as a way to interact with folks that may be expressing some challenges, and maybe that sort of concept brought forward by State Attorney Bates.
Yeah, interaction by individuals for BPD who are having challenges with understanding the law. It's things that we're delivering through our interaction, not only through youth interaction, but interaction of stop searches and arrests. So we've had this through our agency. We've also had this through our training, through our Power DMS system, which is delivered electronically to every officer through their electronic device. This is something that we also go over in reference to our in-service training once a year. So in reference to citations and any new and applicable process or policy comes out, this is something that we not only give through our in-service training, but also through our Power DMS, so they understand, and making the State's Attorney's Office and anybody who is welcome to come through the process in reference to any Q&A of any problem solving. We're definitely ahead of where we were in reference to making ourselves transparent and open to any cross-translation for anything that, as far as policy and procedures that we may have to affect.
Okay, thank you. And then I want to jump over to Director Monty, Director Jackson, in thinking about providing services. I'm guessing that's where we'll make the connection with a lot of the services that we offer through partners of Monty.
Yes,
Can we
sir.
talk a little bit about what that looks like, and have we thought at all about the need and our capacity to meet that need?
So specifically to juveniles, the council may remember that we launched the Sidestep Pre-Arrest Diversion Program some time ago in the Western District. It is a program that was designed by young people who live in the Western District and the police officers that patrolled the district in the aftermath of the death of Freddie Gray in police custody. And so this is a program that is born of the community. We have partnered with the Center for Urban Families so that young folks who are engaged by police officers in the Western District associated with what we consider Category 2 offenses aren't taken into a police district. They are taken into a community center. And they are supported by Robert Bazell on our team, who serves as the youth opportunity coordinator, and they are put into what we traditionally call a diversion program, but that we are now calling opportunity programs. We've successfully completed that pilot. We are working on the evaluation of that pilot, and it is scaling across the city following the same path as GVRS. And so as we see GVRS move from one district into the next, we will see Sidestep move into the district that GVRS is exiting from, if you will. And really looking to make sure that we're being thoughtful about those citations, because what we've come to learn is that Category 2 offenses are the offense types that we use for pre-arrest. They are also the offense types that we use for post-arrest diversion. So Baltimore City is introducing its young people to the criminal justice system twice as many times as surrounding jurisdictions. So really excited about the partnership with Baltimore City Police Department, also with the State's Attorney's Office, about affording our young folks this opportunity.
So if I can, to dovetail on Director Jackson, so we just had yesterday talking about Sidestep and not only its expansion throughout the city. We had what we called a lunch and learn with Department of Juvenile Services, where we addressed those issues, not only in reference to youth engagement with our policy 1207 that directs how we proceed with juveniles, and less intrusive, more appropriate action. So we just had this robust conversation with all our district commanders as well as Department of Juvenile Service just yesterday.
Yeah,
One final point, it is
wanna
worth
offer,
noting that DJS funds this work.
Yeah, we have DJS here in the meeting. I just want to offer an opportunity for you guys to speak up if you'd like to add anything. We have a seat up here if you'd like, or either you can sit down if you'd like. Please introduce yourself. And we mentioned the lunch and learn
Sure.
How are we thinking about this problem, and how are we coordinating with state's attorneys, BPD, Monty, and otherwise?
Sure, thanks for having me. My name is Lisa Reynolds. I am the Executive Director of Community Operations for the Department of Juvenile Services. And like the Colonel had said, yesterday we had a lunch and learn to address how to intervene for youth in the community under, which is referred to as children in need of supervision. So we went over our referral process to understand how to quickly get services and wrap around to those kids in the community at the low level, kids who cannot be charged with a delinquent offense. So I thought that was a real successful event. And in addition, working with Monty on several projects. You had mentioned issues with violent offenders. We definitely have a strategy in place where youth who are victims of crimes of violence or non-fatal shootings, we have our safety plan directive where within 24 hours we are reaching out to the police for safety assessments. We are also working with hospitals as well as bringing in ROCA and other service providers like YAP to the table to address the current issues. So I think those partnerships are going really well. In terms of the Sidestep program, we do have a police liaison embedded at the Western District, Central District, and Eastern to increase our communication with police. We're actively at the table for GVRS, as well as the follow-up coordination meeting that occurs right after that meeting. So I think, we've been invited to the table, we're present, things are going really well at this point.
Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. If you'd like, you can have a seat up here.
Up here?
I'm sure folks may have questions as well. I want to offer, I know, once again, Mr. State's Attorney will have to leave soon. Are there any questions particularly directed? Please.
Yes, sir. I did have a question related to, has MOHS been involved to these types of public safety hearings? Yes, ma'am.
I don't know that they've been invited to the hearings per se, but are we actively making sure that we're engaging every single city agency that we believe is connected to the work? Certainly. We do talk about, from a Baltimore City Public Schools perspective, from a BPD perspective, and MOHS perspective, the student population that is homeless. We know that they are undercounted significantly in our city. But I couldn't answer the question around invitations to the hearings.
Yeah, and so you hit on a point that really has been ringing in my mind, and we're seeing across the district related to persons experiencing homelessness being kind of triaged into the public safety system simply because they don't have housing. And I'm wondering what are the prevention strategies that city agencies are doing to kind of like thwart them, not from a punitive perspective, but also from a prevention perspective, making sure that they have housing so that they don't see the state's attorney's office and the sheriff's office with unneeded citations.
Yep, so from BPD's point, so approximately a month ago, I believe, City Hall executives as well as BPD executives met in reference to homelessness. Both our legal and city solicitor and the City Hall's legal are looking at the standard operating procedures in reference to dealing with individuals who are unhoused. We realize that individuals are dealing with not only behavioral crises, but also dealing with different levels of substance abuse. So BPD is an active partner in realizing that, we're not criminalizing homelessness. We realize that there is something that is going on, that this individual has now found themselves in this position, and we are trying to optimize every resource available to get them the services that they need. So we are well aware of this, and we are actively trying to figure out the standard operating procedure in reference to first contact, least intrusive by BPD, and the most appropriate resource available to providing that individual the resources they needed to become a successful individual again, and helping them not to be a part of the enforcement and law enforcement procedures.
The only other thing that I would add here for context, while it's been a while since I was a member of the consent decree monitoring team, one of the items of identification and reformation revolved around homelessness, and specifically BPD's HOT team, or the homeless outreach team. I do believe that 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 the Colonel speaks directly to the work that is being put in to make sure that we are not penalizing folks for shelter insecurity, and that work is happening cross-agency.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Mr. Chair, I have one more question. Related to the request that Councilman Stokes just mentioned about the commitment from all public safety agencies to kind of see if they're working together. I'm wondering if we can get sort of a matrix about what you all are doing with regard to the interconnectedness between your agencies. I think that that presentation to the council would be very informative, but also, thank you, Director Jackson, would be also informative, but would also add to the commitment that Councilman Stokes was just mentioning earlier. Thank you.
Thank you. I realize we have not completed our reports. I wanted to give Deputy Mayor Barksdale an opportunity. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, sir. Councilman Conway, Councilman Stokes, I believe what you're hearing is what we know is rule 1 of the STAT process. Accurate, timely intelligence clearly disseminated to all. So I am in full agreement, the administration is in full agreement that we all must talk as partners and figure out what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, when we're going to do it. State's Attorney Bates is in the game. The sheriff is in the game. We are all speaking. As the Colonel spoke about the homelessness issue, BPD, MOHS are working together. But if it's one big meeting, perhaps we can schedule it at a time where there's police stat. Everybody, same room, same time, and we're all on the same page. One of the things that I would like to address, sir, really quickly is the citation issue. When speaking with State's Attorney Bates, he clearly understood the need for officers to be on the street, not booking someone for a low-level crime. The thinking of a state's attorney to say, keep the manpower on the street for the citizens of Baltimore when they may be needed was just, it was just wonderful to hear. The sheriff is bending over backwards to help Baltimore City with deployment issues. He's pulling out manpower left and right and making it happen across the city. Executive Director Jackson is engaged in pulling levers and making connections that are just astonishing. BPD is definitely doing their best, sir. Are the numbers satisfactory with violence reduction? No, they're not, but they're not laying down. We are engaged across the board in public safety, and these relationships are solid. So thank you, sir.
Councilman Stokes.
Councilman Porter just gave me an idea. Can we, on my particular resolution, when we get to the point to recess it, we wanted to make sure that all the law enforcement come back with that information that that matrix that Councilman Porter mentioned, and kind of report back to the council what y'all actually doing in the matrix itself. Am I correct, Councilwoman Porter?
Yes, sir.
And I also want to mention, Deputy Barksdale, we got to get it right when we talking about the police and the community. We have to get that right. And the only reason why I say that, because I had a business owner buy 22 bicycles, Trek bikes, for 3 police districts in my district, and the idea was that's Eastern, Southeast, and Central. The idea is to build that relationship with the community. We have to do that all over the city. We need more bicycles for our officers to interact with the community, to have a relationship with the community, because if we have not closed that gap with the community and the police, we're going to be back here again talking about there's no relationship with law enforcement in Baltimore City. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Stokes. Councilman Burnett, I see you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Am I coming through okay?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Thank you, colleagues, and Mr. State's Attorney, representatives from the Police Department, Monzi, and other folks in the room. The question I just had a quick question on the, whether it's the coordinating council work or the reoccurring meetings. And I guess if multiple representatives could weigh in, but what are, I guess, the deliverables of these meetings? Like, what goals are we working towards? Are there particular action items or metrics that this sort of interagency work is working towards? Is it gun violence? Is it like, what are, non-fatal shootings? Like, what are we looking to accomplish together, and what are the things that you all are tracking across whether these meetings are monthly or on a quarterly basis to show what does success look like in this coordinated work is my question.
I'm happy to start and then to pass it off to partners. Thanks for your question, council member. I would say there are two overarching things that we're looking to solve for in the short term and in the midterm, one of which is person-on-person violence that impacts our young people. The second, and so that's not just about gun violence. We are also seeing an uptick in stabbings, right? And so it's why I'm being very specific there. So, and we'll talk about that in the slide deck that we present during the next hearing. So person-on-person violence where a weapon is being used against a young person or by a young person. And then as we think about, and I'll defer to Executive Director Deb Brooks here in a second, as we think about the work associated with the identification of high-risk young people, as we think about creating safety during the summer, as we think about the need to create safety anytime our young people are out and about. The second thing that we're looking to solve for or create is spaces and places of meaningful engagement for them. And I think one of our other partners mentioned this before, not necessarily overly programmed spaces, definitely some programmatic spaces, but also a deep understanding of the fact that our young people will have been, quote unquote, programmed all academic year. And I'm sure that we can all remember, maybe some of us more than others, because I'm probably a bit on the older side here. Sometimes young people just want to dance. And I remember there being teenage dance clubs where there were metal detectors in Baltimore City, and they were considered safe spaces. And we would frequent those often. And so really excited about the work that Dr. Brooks is undertaking, and that many of us here in the room are partnering with her on around the creation of those spaces and places, and I would defer to her. But I would say that those are the two things that we're looking to solve for, and happy to speak about the work that we're doing around what key performance measures look like, what the real results, impacts, outcomes need to be in order for us to determine whether or not we've made the right decisions or not. When you're ready, Dr. Brooks.
Thank you. I know, Mr. State's Attorney, you've got to run. Anything you want to add before you leave?
Thank you. For us, it's a couple things. One, we have to have our infrastructure straight, meaning within the State's Attorney's Office, and we feel good about that. Number two, looking at GVRS, we are working together to have key performance indicators. And number three, also rebuilding those relationships. What we do is we get, unfortunately, a lot at the back end. And our job in the State's Attorney's Office is to put together really good cases to hold people accountable. We believe in putting good cases together, holding people accountable, so if you're the trigger puller, now you're off the street. We hope that's one of the ways that people will drive down crime, but also as a deterrent when you see that people are being held accountable. And so when we look at that, we also look at some of what the police stats also talk about, but at the end of the day, we really look at our internal stats to figure out what's going on for our cases, how many are we null processing, how many are we dismissing, because we don't want to charge people that shouldn't be charged. And so we're also making sure that in the training platform as well, what are we doing to make sure? So with us, we look at the statistics that everybody else has, but we have to look internally, what are we doing? Are we holding people accountable? Are we looking and throwing out the cases where there is not constitutionally policing, a bad stop, for instance? Have we then gone to the police department to talk about that? And we've done that a couple times already, so that it can be educational with them, with us. And for us, if we are putting together good cases and we're going to trial and we're winning those cases, that's how we begin to understand what's going on with us.
Yeah, and I'll add to your point. I think this issue is so important, particularly because the football is handed to you from the police department, and then you take it from there. Our support agencies and partners that work with MONSE to provide resources didn't either take the ball from you or get involved even earlier. And I think that coordination and thoughtfulness and not being too prescriptive on every case that someone needs a citation or to be arrested, I think it's a delicate issue. And I think it's important that we get it right, and we can't get it right in our own silos. So I appreciate Councilman Stokes for bringing together this hearing. We're going to recess it, and I hope to get back his requests for how we're coordinating on all these different measures, and look forward to having that conversation later on. So thank you, Mrs.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Council.
We are still actually going through reports. I want to hand it over to the Sheriff's Office. Mr. Sheriff, if there's anything.
So thank you for having us here. I had a scheduling conflict, as you can see, was doing something else. But I thought this was so important that when that ended early, I walked down here because this is exactly what I'm looking for, is how can the Sheriff's Office coordinate with the rest of law enforcement, with the Mayor's Office, with the Police Department, with the State's Attorney, in order to bring us as part of the public safety solution of Baltimore. And so when we look at the things that we're doing now at the Sheriff's Office, we're building up infrastructure like the State's Attorney talked about. We're new in administration. I think he's 100 days in, we're 140 days in. We're having to rewrite our general orders, we're hiring, we're implementing technology, we're looking at best practices. But we really see that we can be part of this public safety solution. And I'll give an example of what was going on today before I came here, is that in 2016, the Sheriff's Office took over domestic violence protective order services from the police department and started serving those. And so one of the things that happened this morning was that our warrant group that we've been training and stood up in the Sheriff's Office went out because there was a domestic violence protective order that's associated with a warrant for an assault that occurred during the violence. And the warrant group went out to go serve that, and they've entered the home, and they found what looks like a large quantity of narcotics within the house. And so they're standing by waiting for a search warrant to go see if there's illegal guns associated with that as well. And so the Sheriff's Office really can make a difference when we act as we're a law enforcement agency in coordination, and we're not just going out and doing our own thing, which isn't part of the greater, I think, goal and accomplishment to reduce crime. And so, like I said, I stopped what I was doing when I could and ran down here, and I know I have staff here that has a presentation, but this is so important, I think, for us and for the other partners to get all on the same page, and so that the law enforcement has a strategy, and we're looking like what specifically can we each do that's within our lane in order to reduce crime in the city. And I think the fact that we're even talking about this is a huge accomplishment. And so, I can answer some questions that we're doing individually about what my office is doing. We're doing, we're enrolling in special events. We've gone out and done some patrol details that have been highly successful on the corridor in East Baltimore. We did it in Federal Hill. We were in Fells Point last weekend. But just really simple things that the Sheriff's Office is able to do, like our canine dogs need to walk, and we know that we had some issues in the parks. And so we say, go walk your dog in the park, stay there for an extra hour, engage with the community, and people that very responsive to that. The community loved it. And fear went down because of that. And while it may not have reduced crime, it reduced the fear of crime, which is also important. So people can go out and enjoy our public spaces. So these are the kind of things that we love getting input from the council. The mayor's office has been incredibly helpful. Going to the Coordinating Criminal Justice Council, that's very helpful for us to just sit in a room and see who all the players are and be able to pick up the phone and say, hey, we have this issue. Do you have a solution to that? This kind of collaboration is incredibly helpful for us. We've been meeting with the Maryland State Police. I met with the interim superintendent several times. They're helping us do a strategic plan for the Sheriff's Office so we can look at how we can improve our policing and professionalize. I've met with the commissioner several times. I've met with the mayor several times and the mayor's staff several times. I've met with the MTA police. The Maryland Department of Transportation Authority Police Department has actually assigned someone to do our transition, and so we're working with them. They're training some of our deputies to engage in traffic enforcement in a more effective way. So we know that we're doing that in a more effective way. So when the deputies are driving around posting summonses in marked cars and they see a serious traffic violation, they can make a traffic stop. In Fells Point, where we were this weekend, on a traffic stop that we made during one of these deployments, we pulled over someone who was on federal probation, who had a firearm illegally in the glove box when he went to go get his license. Our deputy saw it. We were able to make that kind of arrest. And so these kind of things, I think, you know, you're going to see the sheriff's office engage more. Since this is a new thing for the sheriff's office to be engaging, it's very helpful to have these hearings. It's very helpful to talk to our partners. It's very helpful to collaborate. And as you see us growing, we're very excited to be part of this public safety solution. So I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Sheriff Cogan. Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our partners who are here. I do want to really appreciate some of the changes I've seen within the Sheriff's Department under Sheriff Cogan's leadership. Both appreciate the deployment in Fells Point and just being more of a force multiplier with law enforcement and really taking that proactive stance. Also want to say really grateful for the work, he's not here, but that you've been doing with Councilmember Torrance in his district around making sure when we have a slum landlord who is mistreating tenants in their building, that we are holding that slum landlord accountable and that we are being very, very thoughtful with evictions and not just allowing mass evictions to take place without any kind of consideration for tenants' rights. And so I appreciate both of those things and see that as a tribute to your leadership. My question, concern, comment is I would like to see us be even more aggressive when it comes to slum landlords. I think that for too long in our city, they have skated under the radar and have not been fully held accountable. And I think that your office is very well positioned to be more of a consequence, not for the vast majority of folks in real estate who are doing the right thing by their tenants, but when we see perpetually, consistently out of control buildings where the fire alarm is broken, the elevators are broken, the heat system isn't working, where we have elderly tenants that can't get down out of their building because they're stuck on their floor because the elevator has been out for 5 weeks, and then we see that landlord taking retribution against tenants. I would like to see your office be more of an enforcement mechanism to make sure we are holding people who harm our city fully accountable.
Thanks. I appreciate that. One of the things that this council did and the administration did is you passed a rental licensing law. And that's incredibly important, that licensing law, for someone who's trying to enforce the law when it comes to that. And so one of the things this administration is doing is when the deputies go out, they're making sure that the landlord does have the license. And the license isn't a money grab. The license is, do you have a smoke detector? The license is, did you do a lead paint inspection? The license is, do you have any serious housing violations? And so when we talk about root causes of crime, and we look at like why are children still getting lead paint poisoning, which causes all kinds of behavioral issues, which can result in delinquency, which can then result in incarceration later on. You know, how do we stop that? How do we reduce that in Baltimore City? And I think one of the ways is just like you said, we look at people who are failing to license their property and not doing lead paint inspections and may have children exposed to lead paint, and we crack down on that. And we use the laws that are already on the books and just enforce them, which says that if you're a landlord, you have to have a license and you have to do a lead inspection each time a tenant moves in. And so yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, and I thank you for acknowledging that. And I also think it has to do with what's the root cause of crime? Housing instability is a root cause of crime. Lead paint poisoning is a root cause of crime. And how do we prevent things, further on down the road with our children? So.
No, I think it's absolutely right. As someone who taught in a neighborhood where many children were poisoned by lead, additionally, being really thoughtful about mold as well, as we know that has a severe neurological impact as well. As we look to pass the Strengthening Renter Safety Act, which is another piece of legislation that will hopefully give DHCD a little bit stronger enforcement on that small percentage of really, really bad actors that are consistently causing harm. I look forward to seeing you as a partner in that as well. Thank you.
You will. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Councilman Cohen. I think I just saw the law department leave. I wanted to make sure they stood by their report. Do we have a representative from the mayor's office to at least stand by their report? Thank you. We've had a lot of discussion today, and I wanted to finally get to the school system, school police. We've talked a lot about young people, and young people, I'll dig into this a little more, but really kind of curious, the school system and school police, how you guys have been thinking about coordination and how you guys play a role in that.
How you doing? This is Major Coleman, School Police. We coordinate with the city police. Of course, with the recent incident that happened at the harbor, we had officers on scene who were working along with the city police on that detail. We also work daily with, coordinate with each district. Our officers share intel with the city police departments, districts weekly when they're intel meetings. And also, if there's any incidents that are occurring inside the schools, they notify the districts as well if we're participating in any problems, such as if there's a large altercation. We're now sharing that information with the officers because we don't want incidents to spill over into the communities in the evenings. We also coordinate with just the information that we share. We just updated our MOU with the City Police Department. I'm coordinating with Dr. Brooks as well as Monzi on youth violence and how we can address that together through a different approach, not just an approach where we're just arresting kids or referring them for diversion programs. We're trying to head them off prior to those incidents. And so all of that is with Monzi, Dr. Brooks, as well as the City Police Department. So we're just trying to take a different approach on how we address the youth violence throughout the city.
So this is a question, and I once again open the floor to questions from the committee. A question in light of the recent increase in youth violence, I'd say over the last 6 months or so. I'm really curious if we have a sense of what's going on. Do we see any trends? Do we see any similarities? Where and what time are we seeing these incidents? Were there any early indicators to the altercations that eventually led to some of these shootings and unfortunately some of these homicides? And thinking about the role that guns play in this, where are young people getting these guns? Sometimes we're hearing ghost guns, sometimes we're hearing traditional guns. I don't care which it is, one way or another, our young people should not have access to them. And what can we be doing from, in some cases, our schools, and what we know about what our young people are going through, to intervene in a positive way early, before these things spill over into bloodshed. So I pose that as a very broad question because I realize that each of you have very significant but different roles in addressing what seems to be a worsening problem. And
Social media is playing a big part.
Can you expand a little bit?
Well, there's a lot of going back and forth. Kids are having arguments over social media, things that happen over the weekends, over the holidays, then they come back to the school as the meeting area. That's where they meet at, that's where we have these altercations. And unfortunately, if the dispute is not taken out right in school, they don't get into an altercation there, this plays out into the community.
Interesting. Please, Director.
We've got some data and some information to share with you in the deck associated with your hearing that answers your questions about trends, and happy to share those as it relates to where we're seeing activity happen, the time of day that we're seeing the most activity happen, where young folks are when it's happening. We can also speak to some of our assessment associated with the level of predictors that are in place that we are actively working on. Your point, sir, is a very sound one about the distinct role that each of the agencies play. And at the same time, I would offer that while there are separate responsibilities and duties associated with the work, in my opinion, we've never done the level of collaboration and integration of work that I see us all doing now, and I'm really excited to share with you in Baltimore what that looks like and what it'll look like in the coming weeks.
I appreciate that. And I know you do have a presentation. Before, if we can jump into that, I don't know if we have that available. That'd be helpful. But before we do that, I understand Colonel Jones, you had something you wanted to add.
Yep, so, working with not only school police, but the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, and MOAM, ROCA, as I said, YAP, We Are Us, our faith-based leaders. We are working to address the needs of not only our young people and solutions to decreasing juvenile crime, and not just violent crime, but crime and antisocial behavior. It is truly, as Director Jackson said, it's an all-hands-on-deck approach, and it's a basic call to action for all of us. We're looking at how we collaborate and share intelligence and data. I've said it many times in reference to the meetings that we've had here that BPD looks at not only 24-hour, 3 days, 7, 24, and year-to-date crime, and projecting high days, high times, and where these activities are going to be held and occur at. We are working to address, juveniles, both potentially being suspects as well as victims of crime. We have, although this is not the panacea for this, but we realize that BPD has arrested more juveniles, unfortunately, for homicides and shootings than we ever had in our history. And this is an alarming total. But we do realize that both of us, all entities are involved. We do a great job in pulling individuals out of the river to save them. We have to do, as a collaborative, a better job of finding where they're falling in.
Yeah. What's funny, I think in light of this reminds me of a hearing we had maybe a year ago where we were talking about 10-year trends around deaths of young people, and violence was top of that list. And I think we're seeing in the last 6 months or so a more pointed increase, but this is a trend that we're seeing going back years. What I'm worried about is that it's getting worse, and what I think we immediately need to figure out is why. And once we know why it's getting worse, then we can figure out what we're going to do about it. But first, we need to answer why. And so I don't know if we can jump into your presentation. That would be really helpful.
Mr. Chair, I just have a question for the school police real quick.
Please, yeah. Go ahead, Councilman Ramos.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chair. For school police, you had mentioned that you're working with BPD, and maybe this is for the Colonel as well, on that greater coordination. I can't tell you the number of times where a resident who has seen a student outside of school, in one of my schools, I represent 4 high schools, and the resident calls 911 and says, hey, a student just threw something, it's during school hours or whatever, and whoever answers, whoever, if it's school police or the police, it's theirs. The school police says the Northeast District or Northern District has to do it, and then the police says, no, it's school police. We don't want that to happen. I mean, there's gotta be a way where residents, or at least us, know like who's supposed to do what, because it happens too often in one particular school that I know we're gonna be working through. But we can't have residents like, okay, well then who's supposed to handle this? If a kid is throwing a brick from the lady's garden and throwing it at her car, it's during school hours. That's something the police should be doing. That's something that the school police should be doing. And yet both are saying it's the other person's fault or the other department. So how's that going to work moving forward?
I don't know about that incident. If you want to have a conversation after this, I can follow up.
I was just using it as an example. I can tell you many other instances of the same issue.
But we can respond to that. If the officer from the city police gets there first, he can handle it, as well as the school police officer, whoever gets there first, should pick that call up.
Yeah, but then the school police
assistance.
says, well, wait a second, we've got to give this to BPD. Then BPD says, no, we got to get, I'm just trying to figure out if there's a student, whether it's during school hours or non-school hours, they're near a school, they go to that school, they do something they're not supposed to, who is to respond?
So, depending on what the call for service is and the priority of the call will also dictate who should take the lead in it. But I don't want to, in the words of victimizing the victim, anybody who has suffered an assault or destruction of property, there should be no debate on the scene of who's going to initially or finally handle that.
It's happened on
I know it is what I'm saying, but it should not be that.
Right.
So that is a training thing that we have to do between both agencies, because our patch says Baltimore City. So we should respond, we should address it, and then later on, off scene, address who will be the lead agency with that. So that's something that's a training issue that we can put out between BPD as well as school police. But I will also say that there is a mechanism in place.
Just a final point, if I could here, because your point is a very good one as well, and is something that we did some work collaboratively with the new digital services team here in the city of Baltimore to assess what the current processes are associated with incidents, also in the deck, so that we can start to close some gaps around when do we see a BPD response? When do we see a Baltimore City Public School officer response? When do we see a Maryland an MTA police response? When do we not see a police response at all? And so there are a couple of key examples of some of the process mapping that we've done around what currently happens so that we can identify where the gaps are that you're communicating right now and close those gaps to inform the training and the education that you just heard the Colonel and the Major talk about.
Okay, I appreciate that, especially in light of the work we're doing in one particular school. I think that's going to be super helpful, so thank you. Thank you. I think Director Jackson is segueing right into her presentation.
Thank you. I understand Councilman Cohen's got a question. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again to all the city agencies. This one is for city schools. I was dismayed to learn recently that during the summer, school partners have been informed that they're not to have 5-day-a-week programming, and that programming will only be 4 days per week. Given the sense of urgency about violence in our city and this sort of larger conversation about all of our roles, I think it sends profoundly the wrong signal to our children and families to only have 4 out of 5 day programming. And when we think about safety holistically, it can't just be law enforcement. It needs to be all of us doing our part. And so I wanted to understand that decision and understand why we have communicated to our school partners to only hold programming for 4 out of 5 days of the week.
Hello, Councilmember Cohen. John Davis, Chief of Schools. That is something that we've had in place for the last 2 or 3 years. To a large degree, right, even though it is the summer, those of us that have worked in schools and have been principals in schools know that the summer is still almost nonstop. And I would say it's as much a retention issue as anything else. But when you have school-based staff that are, in the end, opening up their buildings for 12 months straight, it is a long and tiring grind. And so one of the decisions we made, I actually think we made it right at the beginning of COVID, was to have a few Fridays off where the buildings were closed during the summer. Again, right, people will always say the summer, you're an educator, you don't have to work. That's not the case when you're a school leader, and that's not the case when you're opening up your buildings. That's the understanding behind it. And while we have communicated that with some partners, if there are specific ones that we can work with because their programming needs to continue someplace else, or if we need to problem solve something around it, we're happy to do that.
Chief, I definitely appreciate that. I'm hearing from your partners that they were also dismayed to learn about this decision. And so I think it's a concern for city schools staff. And you know, and I know, and we all know in this room that for some of our kids, school represents a sanctuary and a safe place to be, especially during the summer where we see a rise and a peak in violence impacting our children. And so for me, any decision that restricts the amount of time that our young people are safely in programming in groups like Elevate or any of the other summer collaboratives that we have, to me that represents an increased likelihood that they will be in harm's way. And again, I think we all need to be thinking more about prevention and not just the law enforcement response to student safety. And so I would just ask as a request from me at this hearing that we reverse that decision and give partners autonomy to determine whether it makes sense for them to stay open 5 days a week.
So, good afternoon. Dr. Deborah Brooks, Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success. So thank you for saying that. The Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success is working very closely with city schools and other partners around programming for our young people this summer. We stood up for the first time Spring Break Teen Camp. The first time ever, which we opened up 4 rec centers for extended hours in the evening during spring break to provide additional opportunities. And I've heard multiple council members speak about us not programming for them, but what it is that they would like for us to do. We had movie night, we had silent disco, and we had game nights because we listened to our young people. Beginning Monday, we'll actually be in our schools to hear from our young people, to hear what is it that you all want. What type of activities would you like to engage in? And so we are also working very collaboratively, as I said, with city schools, as well as with private partners to stand up additional programming this summer. So although the school buildings may be closed on Fridays, there will be programming and activities and safe spaces that we will have available for our young people. So that we can make sure that we're engaging them in the activities that they would like to engage in. And so we'll talk a little bit more about what we are planning for our young people that's preventative around summer engagement. And more importantly, some of the data that we've seen, we do really good programming for our 7 to 12-year-olds. And really looking at that data and where the gaps and who we're missing. And this is why we are strategically and intentionally meeting with our young people in our middle and high schools next week to hear from them as we stand up summer programming for our young people to include those Fridays and Saturdays for our young people.
Yeah, and Director Brooks, I deeply appreciate that approach, especially the proactive going out and asking our young people themselves what they want and what they need. I will still say, though, I think for a lot of our young people, it is important that they maintain continuity during the summer at the program that they're at. I know some will avail themselves of the rec center opportunity, which is great, but a lot won't. And so I will again ask for city schools whether we can reverse that decision and provide autonomy for school-based sites to determine whether it makes sense for them to stay open.
I mean, we can take, I will always take things back and discuss. Councilmember Cohen, you've brought up things all the time, right? And so I'm happy to do that. But I want to be very clear, right? We have to retain our best school leaders. We have to retain our school-based staff. And a few Fridays off, right, has gone over well with them. And so, yes, we can take that back. At the same time, I'm not going to promise you we're going to reverse the decision here.
I appreciate that. I will look forward to following up with you. I feel a strong sense of urgency on this issue and making sure that, at the very least, we're giving autonomy to our school-based leaders to make that call because summer, as we all know, is a time when violence increases among our young people, and so having a safe place is critically important. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Director Jackson, how much time do you need for this presentation?
I can talk as slow or as fast as you want me to.
All right. I think I was kind of flipping through it. I think there's a lot of useful stuff in here. Do you think we can do it in 10 minutes? I think folks will have a lot of questions about.
I believe folks will have a lot of questions too. I'll talk 10 minutes fast.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Next slide, please. So just by way of quick overview, we are going to talk about trends that we have seen this calendar year so far when we get into the recent upticks. But before that, we're going to talk about trends that we've seen over time. Next, we'll talk about the coordinated response to the problem that will demonstrate that we are being intentional about not operating in silos. Next slide. Thank you. So in 2023, we have seen more homicides and shooting victims under the age of 18 when we compare this to last year. In fact, since the start of 2023, and this is through 326. And so there may be a slight delta between what you heard the colonel report, given that we've seen some activity since the 26th. So since the start of 2023, 5 children at this point under 18 had been fatally shot, with another 23 being non-fatally shot. I believe that the numbers as of right now are 9 and 28, if I recall correctly. This increase really reflects an uptick, next slide please, in the homicides among the 18 to 24-year-old age group, and shootings among individuals that are 14 to 17 years of age. What you're looking at here, and I should probably rewind a bit to say that these aren't just MONSE's slides. This is a collaboration between the Office of Performance and Innovation, BPD, the Digital Services Team, the MTA Police, and MONSE and other agencies. And so when we look at homicides and shootings specifically going back to 2021, we're seeing a doubling of the number of homicides in victims under the age of 18, more than a doubling, quite frankly, as it relates to homicides, and a tripling, in fact, and then more than a tripling of shootings when comparing 2020 through 2023. Next slide. This is another way that we're looking at the data. This slide and the one after it breaks out the homicides and the non-fatal shootings of our young folks. As I mentioned before, the uptick that we're seeing in the 18 to 24 age group and the 14 to 17-year-old age group by quarter, if you look at the bottom chart that the closed captioning is writing over, so folks might not be able to see it at home. Next slide is the exact same slide again for the non-fatal shootings. Obviously seeing year over year upticks when we compare Q1 across the board from 2020 through 2023. I'm gonna jump into the coordinated response because I feel like this is where a lot of the meat of the conversation is. Let's go to the next slide. So to Councilwoman Ramos's earlier question, this slide and a slide after it are just 2 of the process maps that Digital Services put together to really show us the actors, if you will, associated with incidents. This first slide shows an occurrence of violent incidents, for example, an active shooting, and which partners are currently involved in that response and which ones are not. Next slide demonstrates an incident at an MTA or a bus stop and what the current process is around communication, around notification, around who's responsible for the management of the incident. I'll pause here for a minute to say that there are 2 other incident types that we specifically looked into: incidents at a school and incidents where BPD gets intelligence ahead of time. What we know to be true is that there are some process gaps that we need to close. And one of the things that we are going to be working through under the leadership of Dr. Brooks, I'm providing support, but under her leadership is closing the gaps in these processes around immediate incident response, while simultaneously doing the work of creating new processes that prevent the need for incident response, to Councilman Cohen's point. So how do we get from this place where we are just focusing on, and I shouldn't say just focusing, but where there's focus on enforcement and not necessarily as much of a defined process around how prevention happens. Next slide. So here's kind of where the rubber hits the road from our perspective. The Violence Prevention Task Force has been expanded and includes a whole host of city agencies and city, state, and other partners that Violence Prevention Task Force is one that was legislatively mandated back in 2020. It's a part of the work that also created the Comprehensive Violence Prevention Plan, for those of you that might recall. It was originally chaired by Dr. DeRosa and is now co-chaired by Dr. DeRosa and by me. The goal of the VIPTIF really is about making sure that we're implementing violence reduction strategies in collaboration with our partners to make sure that we're getting to a place of prevention, right? Understanding where our young folks are falling into the stream, and not just our young folks, but folks in general. And it's important to mention contextually for this hearing that the VIPTIF expansion includes the establishment of 3 work groups. The first work group is intensive case management for school-aged young people. We'll talk about what that means in a minute. School-based violence intervention, which we've spoken to this body about before and can speak about some more, and an equity task force. And is really going to be rooted in what I call ROI, not return on the investment, but the results, the outcomes, and the impacts that we're looking to have. Next slide, please. So for the intensive case management for school-age young people, want to be really clear in saying that we are talking about 7-year-old through 21-year-old young people. In Baltimore City Public Schools, if you're a young person with a disability and or an individualized educational plan, you can attend school through age 21. We know that Breon, who was a homicide victim, attended Achievement Academy and was 20 years old. And so we want to make sure that we aren't selecting young people out by just using the legal definition of juvenile. So Dr. Brooks and the Baltimore City Health Department co-chair this work. We are in the process of working through data sharing with agencies like the Department of Social Services, DSS, DJS, Baltimore City Public Schools, BCPSS, all of the alphabet soup that you can imagine are in this room. I think that one of the key things to share here is that we differentiated what an at-risk young person looks like and what a high-risk young person looks like. And so high risk is a young person who's at imminent risk of either being a perpetrator or a victim of violence with a weapon. And we time bound what that looked like. So from today, anything occurring in that young person's life from today, dating back 6 months, makes them high risk. So coming back to your question around any predictors, yes, there are predictors. If we are seeing an escalation of a young person be in a series of fights, or start to demonstrate self-abusive behavior, or be adjacent to someone who was victimized, like they become high risk. At risk includes a 1 to 2 year look back and is really looking at those who may be at possible risk for perpetration or victimization with a weapon.
And Director, for clarity's sake, do we get that information from the schools? Do we get it from BPD when they have interactions, or what?
Yes. I think folks that know me know that I'm not an or person, I'm an and both. It's why all the partners are in the room. We get it from DJS, DSS, BPD, everybody. And so the conversations that are happening right now that we've identified what the data points are that we need from each agency is that we're looking back across 2 fiscal years. So we're going to do the 2-year look back, even though that's for at risk, to determine at risk and high risk, with the immediate prioritization being placed on our high-risk young people. With regard to funding, to the point that you made about the hearing last year, it was the 5-year look back from the Child Fatality Review report. And I want to be really clear with Baltimoreans that that report is informing this work. And so $250,000 from ARPA funds have been put aside to front load this work for case management, and we recently submitted a $500,000 grant to the DOJ in a cross-collaborative way to get additional work funded here. By point of comparison, we saw Operation Safe Kids, which is very different than what this work is, be budgeted for anywhere between $400,000 and $1.4 million over the course of what I believe was 16 years. This might be a typo here, for that funding. The second workforce, or the second work group, is the Equity Task Force work group. This is something that the Comprehensive Violence Prevention Plan mandates. This is co-chaired by the Office of Equity and Civil Rights and the Baltimore City Health Department, really thinking about transportation of our young folks to and from school, access to jobs, the equity in its entirety. Next slide, please. And then the school-based violence intervention program. I won't spend much time on this because I think that this is the slide that we've probably talked about the most. 3 schools, Mervo, Carver, Digital Harbor. What I will say here is that we are pleased to share with this body the community-based organization that we are negotiating a contract with for this, and we are in the process of recruiting. That partner is with us today. It is Associated Catholic Charities, who will be delivering this body of work across all of these schools. $700,000 over 2 years from NLC, in addition to almost $300,000 from the governor's office to support this pilot. It's worth noting that this work isn't happening anywhere else in the country, that Baltimore is leading the way in this work. Next slide. Here is just a timeline associated with the school-based intervention program. If folks have questions, I do want to remind folks that this is not Safe Streets in Schools, right? Violence interrupters do very different work than what we are calling violence intervention specialists. And they're going to be partnering with young people and paying those young people, 24 of them, in fact, across 3 schools in new and unique ways. Next slide. Safe Passage. So this is some of the work that we did in partnership with the MTA police. So one of the questions that we really had to ask ourselves, or a couple of questions, were when were we seeing peak violence for our young people? More than 50% of violence as it relates to homicides and shootings for our young people were occurring between 7 a.m. and 3 p.m. So the times that they were going to school, supposed to be in school or were in school, right? And immediately after. And so we wanted to dig deep and think intentionally about what it would look like to make sure that we could guarantee our kids' safety as they went to school, because all of the mechanisms are in place to keep them safe while they're in the school, right? There are metal detection systems. There are climates in schools where you walk into a building and you're greeted by adults, like right out of the gate. And so what are we doing to keep people safe as they traverse to and from school? So Safe Passage is really meant to address their safety concerns, especially because we've seen victimization increase year over year. Next slide. The data that you're looking at now was shared by MTA police. So we specifically asked them about 3 corridors, Mondawmin, for obvious reasons, Lexington Market, and Bel Air Erdman. And here is the data from them. What you can see overwhelmingly here is that Mondawmin is consistently ranked the highest around student-related incidents. In the next slide, we're going to break out what those incidents look like. So in the next slide, you see that the yellow bar indicates, or the yellow portion of the bar indicates common assault. That's fights, right? And so we're seeing, obviously, a significant amount of fights. If we look at the first portion of this, it shows Mondawmin year over year from academic year 2018, because we did want to go back prior to the COVID years to see what these numbers looked like. Next slide. And there were some additional findings coming out of this in the work that we were doing with the chief at MTA Police, that we see the biggest challenges as it relates to safe passage happening at major transportation hubs. Mondawmin being the first, State Center being the second, Charles Center being the third. Second, to transportation hubs, the incidents are occurring along the route, so not necessarily something that we're going to be able to mobilize or deploy resources for, right? This is as people are getting on or off a bus. For folks who have been in Baltimore for a while, I don't think it's going to come as a surprise that MTA bus route number 22 is of significant concern. I think that the Colonel and I both rode the 22 bus to Mervo back in the day. It is one that traverses so many city neighborhoods and districts. It goes from Mondawmin to Bayview. And so that bus begins at or dumps out at Mondawmin. What's worth noting and sharing with you all is that what used to be called school trippers, which were designated buses for school riders only, they were discontinued by federal direction. And so we're dealing with a whole host of folks getting on and off the bus, not necessarily the bus is at the bottom of the hill, it's just for students to get transported home. And then the final slide here around recommendations as it relates to safe passage. So a recommendation was made to the mayor and to the chief administrative officer, who has given us the thumbs up on this, that we designate Mondawmin as a safe passage priority area. To the Major Coleman's point, social media tells our young folks when there's gonna be an event at Mondawmin. And so you'll have more folks riding the bus to Mondawmin to video record and or to just get a glimpse at a fight. And so we have been told that we can designate Mondawmin as a safe passage priority area. That wouldn't just mean city agencies. It means Baltimore City Public Schools. It means city employees, community-based organizations, and others to provide this support. We also made a recommendation to form a safe passage working group to use data so that within 30 days we can identify the top schools where there are challenges associated with incidents of violence happening around the proximity of the school, so that we can stand them up as safe passage priority areas, and then to really continue to evaluate safety so that we can make updates as appropriate and to make that information publicly accessible. We see other jurisdictions doing this. I mean, as closely as DC, we see them doing safe passage work, and this is work that Baltimore City used to do in the past, even though it was a bit informal. We're looking to formalize it now. Happy to take any questions and or to invite my partners to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Director Jackson. A couple of things. I appreciate you guys pulling together that data, and it doesn't answer all our questions, but I do think it helps us refine our questions and our thoughts about what we know and what we can then do about what we know. First, you mentioned the, let me find the slide. You mentioned the school trippers. School trippers are just buses that essentially wait for students, and then why was that stopped federally? Because it sounds to me like probably our biggest problems are happening to and from school. And when I'm thinking about a lot of the shootings, it's typically when it's happening after school, maybe I guess sometimes in the morning, but probably even more so after school. And when you think about school trippers, that would be an opportunity for us to, I don't know, be a little more thoughtful about adult supervision or things like that that would discourage, wild behavior, fights, arguments, or tamp them down before they escalate to a point that we've started to see. So if you could tell me a little bit more about that school trippers and why it was discontinued, and if there is any other way that we can think about getting our young people safely to and from their homes and school.
Thank you for that question. It is also one that I asked the MTA police, and unfortunately, council member, I'm gonna have to come back to you with that answer. They did answer it for me, and I don't have the Post-it note with me to answer that question. But what I do recall is that there were some regulatory changes made at the federal level associated with dedicated rider routes that aren't just connected to school trippers and school-age young people, but also when you've got dedicated buses to transport folks to a game or to anything. So there were some regulatory changes that were put in place. Happy to take that as a takeaway and provide a more detailed answer.
And I'm curious, I'll pose the same sort of question to schools. Do we have any insight on what that is and why that's happened, and even more, how we're thinking about that trip for our young people to and from their homes to school?
We have a detail that goes.
If you could use the microphone. Yep.
We have a detail that goes up to Mondawmin every day because we have about 5,000 students that come through there daily. And we coordinate with MTA Police as well as Western District to try to have resources at that location because so many kids come through there. And that's why we see the uptick, and that came out through the meeting that we had, along with Mondawmin. I mean, Mondawmin Security and MTA Police.
And, you know, in thinking about,
It's also the reason why we're looking to stand up this Safe Passage working group, because many of us recall our teachers walking us to our buses, right? And there were certain things you're going to do in front of your teachers and certain things not. And so we are looking to make sure that we've got folks whose students recognize at this major transportation hub as we step through this work and evaluate the other top 5 areas that we see. And not just teachers, community-based partners. We do, or I have come to learn that there are already some partnerships happening in our community. Liberty Rec Center, so Kim Trueheart is partnering with We Are Us right now to make sure that folks, young people, can traverse back and forth safely into the Liberty Rec Center. And so leveraging relationships that we already have with community-based organizations and inviting and to the extent necessary, figuring out how to incentivize teachers to, you know, be at those major hubs, those major locations, so that we aren't solely relying on law enforcement to be there to deliver that message.
So if I could just add, as many of you all council members know, I'm just recently coming from city schools, as well as being a former administrator. And so there are still many administrators who do walk the students to the transportation hubs, or even walk the students closely to their homes to make sure the students are safe, as well as teachers and, as Director Jackson said, community members as well that are participating in this. And so I think with this data, incentivizing others to be able to participate, as well as other community members coming out and joining as well. But I just wanted to also share that there are currently school-based administrators that are participating right now that are walking young people to the transportation hubs and out in the community to make sure the students are getting home safely.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm just going off of some of the rough data you threw out there, Director Jackson. You were saying that most of the incidents, 70+%, are between the time of 7 a.m. and 3 p.m.
If I recall correctly, I think it's about 54% between 7 a.m. and 3 p.m. At the last data run that we stepped through with the Office of Performance and Innovation.
And that's especially helpful because I think, I'm curious how many incidents we're seeing in schools. My guess is that's probably not captured in that data, so we're actually looking at literally the trip to school and the trip from school. And I don't know if that was...
We were looking at data in which the Baltimore Police Department needed to be involved. I would defer to the major over here with regard to any in-school events that didn't necessarily require a BPD response.
Okay.
I don't have that data with me, but I can provide the data for the in schools.
And I asked that question or made that point particularly because essentially 46% of our problem stops after 3. So when we're thinking about where we put our patrols or how we spend our time or where we spend our money, and even I would even say it's not even necessarily just police officers. Sometimes it's just adults being nearby to break up a scuffle or something like that. It goes a long, long, long way, and we might not even need to necessarily get the police department involved.
And hitting the nail on the head right there, council member. I think it's one of the reasons why Safe Passage is going to be so important, and the work group over the next 30 days really assessing what those top 5 areas are that follow Mondawmin is going to tell us where we need to make sure we're mobilizing what I would consider community resources so that for all intents and purposes, we're augmenting our partners over here too. Am I right?
Yep. I'll hand off to Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I am curious about the fact that we wouldn't even be here if our young people and we were doing a better job in training people on how to manage conflict. I was the board of community mediation. I am a trained mediator and facilitator. Can we get this as part of the curriculum in our schools? Because if our young people are able to have the conversation and really listen and understand, maybe, just maybe, I mean, we got to get guns off the street, and I have a question about the guns, but in this particular case, what we're actually seeing, I mean, we lost Jeremiah because it was an argument over something else, okay? That young person would be alive today if there was an opportunity for that conflict to have been addressed in a different way. So are we getting conflict mediation in the schools today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll talk about some of the conflict mediation we do. Schools and administrators do that quite often, right? Frankly, it's just part of the job. But what we've done in city schools is make sure we've got those resources also at central office, because some of the situations that occur are big enough that a school administrator, right, they may have tried to mediate one time, but the situation is still escalating.
That's not what I'm asking. So what I'm asking is, it's not just addressing the issue directly, which I know we're going to work on, but is literally, intentionally training our young people on active listening, on the fact that a side eye doesn't mean you're disrespected. That's what I'm asking. So, like, I don't know, I'm not an expert on whether or not, although you are because you're about to step up to the mic, whether, you know, what grade is appropriate. I would say kindergarten, okay, all the way through, where it's enmeshed in our curriculum all the way through about how to address it. And there might be just intentional in, like, I'm just pulling out a grade, 3rd and 4th grade, because I have a 10-year-old. 3rd and 4th grade, where it's like, let's have those conversations. How do we actively listen? So it's a retraining and a rethinking on all of our teachers and our administrators. But, you know, bring in community mediation to actually do some, you know, partnering, particularly in the middle schools. My daughter's about to be in middle schools, and how that's going to work. I mean, I think that the school system, we want to help, okay? This isn't like you got to do it. Like, there are resources out there. So Director and your colleagues are about to answer that question, but I think it's critical. I think this is critical.
Let me hit one thing, if I could, Director. I think the best, thank you for clarifying that. I'm sorry I went on the wrong.
No, you're fine.
I think the best place for that we have found is in our advisories and in our morning meetings, right? We have taken time out of the schedule every day to make sure that teachers make those relationships, not just with individual students, but within the class, right? And so that time is around SEL, specific activities. It can go into college and career readiness. It can go into a lot of academic things. But I'm pretty sure that we hit that to some degree. Is it enough? I think that's a good push on me to go back and see, is it enough? right? But I want to be clear that we are being intentional with that space in schools so that that relationship building can occur not just with the teacher, but within the staff, and eventually get to the point where, yes, you're active listening, you're understanding what really is a threat that you have to bring and something that you can de-escalate as a child. Like you said, frankly, we have to start talking about this on the kindergarten level.
So before I have
I'd
the
like to hear back when you do that, you know, and understand
What that is, yes.
Thank you.
Before I have the Deputy Director of Community Violence Intervention come up, who is the co-chair for the school-based violence intervention, come and talk to you all, because we just talked about this yesterday with the health department and have been talking about it for some time. I think it makes sense to contextually share that when I was the executive director of the Mediation Center, there was a contract with Baltimore City Public Schools in which we went into middle and high schools to conduct mediations, whether those were student on student, student and teacher, parent and teacher, all of the things. The district has communicated that they would not be opposed to reinstituting a contract with the Mediation Center if we deem that was something that made the most sense. I think that it's also worth sharing, though, that, and this is not a knock on Baltimore Community Mediation Center because I have deep love for the organization, there are going to be certain types of events in which we need a different type of mediator.
No question.
That
It's a
might
totally
be
different- yeah.
a We Are Us who has been able to broker treaties, if you will, around group-related activities, and or a ROCA or a DJS YAP program. And so want to make sure that we're being really thoughtful about what the spectrum of mediation services and restorative practices around restorative circles to make sure that the victim and the offender have the supports that they need from a community standpoint are all well in place, and we can't start too young. And I'll turn it over to Crystal to share with you all what we're thinking about doing here with the health department.
Good afternoon, everyone. Crystal. Here we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Crystal Miller. As Director Jackson said, I'm the Community Violence Intervention Deputy Director for MONSE. And in the development of programming for the school-based violence intervention program, we have considered and are building into that programming, providing students with training and tools and techniques around conflict mediation. So while we have staff there to intervene and work with students on de-escalating and intervening when there are conflicts, the students will also receive those skills to be able to resolve their own conflicts before staff get there, to help resolve those conflicts so they don't escalate into something bigger, where there's the opportunity for it to travel outside of school into their communities, but also come from their communities into the school and turn into a bigger issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm excited about that program being implemented in my district, and I appreciate your hard work on it. I just think that we need to think about this from the very beginning to, senior. The other thing is then there's the parents and the adults who actually grew up with the culture of, we're gonna, beat everybody up if they're disrespecting us. And so one of the ideas that came up in an earlier conversation I had today, so I don't know if this is possible, but what I want to do is make sure that we're expanding mediation as the norm across the city, so people know, hey, you've got a conflict, let's go to community mediation, or we know that We Are Us is intervening, or Safe Streets is intervening in the moment. But I also think we need, if there's a way to do like a 911 diversion, if you will, right? So we have the 911 diversion for the suicidal ideation and for mental health. But if someone calls and says, hey, they're about to have this conflict here, and then Safe Streets is, if it's in a Safe Streets area, Safe Street goes, or if, I just think that in the way that we practice the work, and we want to make sure that people understand that you're not supposed to, solve a conflict with a gun or a fist or a knife, that we're doing it throughout the whole spectrum of how there can be interactions. I
want to tag on to that a little bit, because I think you're right. I think one of the challenges that I think we haven't fully flushed out is one that was brought up earlier, social media, and our ability to see these problems before they manifest physically. And I'm really curious about that sort of timeline and that ability for us to identify beefs, problems, issues with our young people so that we can have them managed through an appropriate means. Some of that plays out on social media and chat rooms and, whatever, well before.
I'm never getting my daughter a phone, but.
So I think that's kind of the pink elephant in the room that we haven't really grappled with. And when we look at, changes over the last 6 months or even over the last 5 years or 10 years, social media is so pervasive and so influential on our young people and their communities and how they're seen. So I'm curious if we thought about that. I feel like that's the missing piece for us.
I think
It's all missing. I think we're just not doing enough all
Yes,
around.
I agree.
I think, sir, you're spot on with that. I just had a text conversation with my son, and he texted me LYK, and I'm like, what does that mean? Right? So I literally just had that. So I will say that we have an open source unit that is actively investigating social media information of all sorts. Right? So when we do see those incidents where there is a potential for a gathering or a pop-up, we're getting that out to our districts immediately. The issue that arises is twofold. One is you have also social media platforms that as soon as it's posted, it's also getting rid of. It's dismissed. So we can't track those ones like Snapchat. It's up, it pops up, everybody gets it, and then it's gone. We also realize that with like street racing, when they promote those things that we see in this geography, individuals know that we are monitoring that. So now they're going to alternative means of getting the information out. So when we can capture it by word sourcing and keywords, we do. And we get it out to our entities to not only prepare for it, deploy for it, but also where we can go to the organizers and the promoters of it, have conversations with them about this is the impact that it is having. For those other ad hoc ones, we are still trying to crack that nut because it is difficult. Yes, sir.
Just a couple of other things here, if I could. I want to come back to Councilwoman Ramos's question so that it doesn't get missed, and then yours, sir, if that makes sense. So with regard to parents and conflict mediation not necessarily being something that is managed and or taught in the home, that is also something we talked yesterday with Dr. DeRosa and her team, who's co-working on this with us, so that we are providing that level of training not just within schools but also to families. We recently awarded the Baltimore Community Mediation Center a contract for training communities around conflict resolution to make sure that we can start to have that practice in our homes on a more regular basis. And in fact, the Comprehensive Violence Prevention Plan says that that's one of the priorities. And so I would offer that we're going to start to see a different type of messaging, even messaging visually placed in neighborhoods over the coming months with regard to mediation being a choice. So coming back to your question, sir, about social media, we speak often with BPD about the motives behind the activity that's happening as it relates to our young people. To your question before about trends, some of it is absolutely group on group. Some of it's individualized, some of it's retaliation because of someone being adjacent to someone else. And some of it's social media. In addition to the intel that BPD provides, and I can't tell you how many text messages or emails I get every single day based on just how diligently they are scrubbing Baltimore City's interwebs. We also believe that one of the potential benefits of doing this school-based violence intervention work with these student ambassadors across what is currently our top 3 most violent schools, is that we've got ambassadors who will have built trusted relationships with the adults that are going to be a part of this program that can potentially go to them and say, hey, something might be happening. How should we handle this? We, not you, right? How should the students handle it in partnership with the adults? And so those things are on the horizon. I don't know that that answers your immediate question, but when we do this right, we have selected ambassadors that have a deep level of account or credibility in the schools for a whole host of reasons, and then brokered relationships with them in ways that contribute to violence being tamped down and prevented.
Just to follow up on that, it sounded like you are working with community mediation on doing what they've done in the past. You can go to community associations to tell people about what mediation is and how they can access services, which I think is a good thing. It sounded also that you were talking about, really a broader sort of marketing, if you will. Is that correct? We would love those materials because I think all of us, we have our distribution networks, and we want to be a part of relaying that message of, like, you don't have to shoot a gun, you can talk it out, or whatever the slogan is. That's a good one, by the way. Then, you can, it could be, we want to be helpful. And I don't always speak for my colleagues, but I think I speak for my colleagues on that as well. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
I want to acknowledge Councilman Glover, who's joined the hearing, and I also just want to say to Councilwoman Ramos's idea of that training. I think we can't have access to all social media. Some of it is private between individuals or groups of individuals, in which we can't get there. But it sort of begs the question if there's a training component that we can do within our schools for our young people, so that when they're experiencing these things, they know how to handle them or what to do about it. Because otherwise, we're left only responding. But if we can prepare our young people as early as possible, maybe before they get phones, or before they get social media accounts, maybe that'll help them deal with these decisions before we have to begin to intervene. So I just want to turn it over to Councilman Cohen. I understand he's got a question.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director Jackson and Director Brooks and your teams. I want to big up my colleague's point around conflict resolution and just note that on September 12th, 2022, the council unanimously passed a resolution calling on city schools to adopt conflict resolution and restorative practices across every school. And what I will just add to this is that it's frustrating because we keep having this conversation and we know some of the answers here. Like, we were the first city to have legislated trauma-informed care. We were one of the first cities to implement restorative practices, and we're a pioneer. We saw through research from Hopkins a 40% reduction in suspensions for the schools that implemented it, with a simultaneous increase in school culture. And so, to me, it's not about not knowing what to do, it's just about not doing it. And I think that we just need more political will to scale the programs that work and to invest in them. And I do want to thank Director Jackson, the $700K from NLC. I think that's huge. I feel the Safe Passages program has a lot of promise. I hope we're thinking beyond Mondawmin, because since we have school choice, we know that this impacts every high school, and I'm sure every single one of us see it with our schools in our districts, that there is often conflict at dismissal time spilling out into community. So that's all I want to leave it as, is that I think, to me, I just am really hoping to see an acceleration of the practices that Baltimore is already nationally recognized for doing, and that we know work to reduce conflict. I think it's critically important and essential, and certainly a resolution that we've already passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman.
I did have one
Councilwoman
question related to budget priorities for conflict resolution and mediation. Is that going to be upcoming within this next budget cycle for programming?
I would offer that I'm confident that it's baked into Monty's existing budget with regard to community-based grants.
Okay.
That we want to make sure that that we are in schools that are ready to partner and have the capacity to partner, which is why we depend heavily on Mr. Davis and the chief of staff and the school CEO to tell us what that looks like. Yeah.
Thank you, Director Jackson. And I know that may have been a very kind of low hanging fruit question, but I want to begin, as Councilman Cohen just saying, when we're talking about KPIs as it relates to quality, the accountability dashboard, really executing what we're looking for. I want to make sure that we have a sustainable component to those types of programs moving forward, making sure that we're engaging community-based organizations on a consistent level so that not only are we tracking the money, we're documenting the money, but we're making sure that we have quality measurements for the funds that are being dispersed to these relative community organizations. Thank you, ma'am.
Yep, in the past, this is funding that's come from the CDC, from other sources outside of the city into the Baltimore City Health Department, into other city agencies, and then kind of funneled down through community-based organizations. Some dollars get funneled into, obviously, our management board, the Family League, but hear you loud and clear, and we'll continue to depend heavily on our partnership with Baltimore City Public Schools to guide the way.
Thank you, and it will further substantiate, different supplemental and budget requests that I know that most of the agencies that are represented here today will be coming towards the City Council as we approach the upcoming budget season. And more importantly, as council members are able to move money, it will be able to substantiate your approaches moving forward. Because I know for my review of the budget, that is what I will be looking for, the quality care measurements of true reduction of these said social ills within our community and how it is connected to our budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? I want to say, one, thank you guys for putting in the time to do as best you can an analysis of the problems that we're seeing. And we kind of broached this topic around young people and violence and the uptick that we've seen. And I think it would be really helpful as a report to the committee if we had a sense for, given the data, given what we know about the problem, what we're going to change, what we're going to do. And I know we recently announced the curfew, and while I appreciate that may help in some areas, it seems like some of the biggest opportunities for leverage are not at that time. And I really want to think about what we can do with deployment, with coordination with our schools, with social services, with DJS. And if there's anything you'd like to add before we wrap up, feel free to. But what we can be doing to help our young people during those core hours, 7 to 3 or 7 to 4, if you want to give it a little bit extra, to make sure that these, rolling aggravated assaults or fights don't turn into homicides. No parent wants to send their child to school and not see them come home. And so I want to make sure that we're thinking about that piece. And I want to make sure that we have a data-informed, strategic, sensible, and comprehensive as best we possibly can approach. And I'm looking at you, Director, but really I should, if I had more eyes, I'd be looking at all you guys, because we should be working across the board and making sure that all the pieces connect and make sense. We can't lose young people like this. And the trend does not need to go up any further. So I want to thank you guys for being thoughtful, for having a robust conversation. I want to thank the committee for your great questions. And I want to request that report, comprehensive, based on what we know today and anything else we find additionally going forward for follow-up. So thank you all, and this hearing is in recess.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.